You're listening to the Zach Gelb Show on Fox Sports 920 The Jersey.
All right, welcome back in. 4:16 is the time in the Princeton Orthopedic Associates studios. This is the Zach Gelb Show. NFL league meetings well underway out west, and someone that's out there right now covering the Eagles for Comcast Sports, that is Dave Zangaro, who's kind enough to hop on board with us right now. Dave, appreciate a few minutes. Thanks for the time, and how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Well, I'm doing great. So it seems like out west right now, it's an Andy Reid family reunion with that coaching tree. Harbaugh, Ron Rivera, Bowles, McDermott, Pederson. I saw some of the pictures from today. Seems like Andy must be a happy guy these days.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty incredible when he comes here, and just about every coach, it seems like, has been under him at some point. It's a really impressive tree, and then it's not just the guys who are head coaches now, it's the guys who have been in the past, too. You're talking about Brad Childress and Pat Shermer, Leslie Frazier. There's a ton of coaches who came up under Andy Reid, so it is kind of interesting to see all of them, or at least the ones that are here, get together and spend some time. And I know they were telling stories the other day, and Andy Reid talked about it a little bit today, just old stories from the vet. And it's a unique thing that they have that not many other people have, that kind of fraternity within the fraternity of the NFL.
And the bevy of names is really the interesting part to me, because Andy Reid's been a good coach in this league for a long time, but hasn't won a Super Bowl. You see Belichick in New England. He's won 5 Super Bowls, but he hasn't been able to really produce any great head coaching figures. What do you think it is about Andy that he's been able to produce this a really impressive resume when it comes to all these coaches that we now see in the league?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first part of that is he's just a really good coach. I mean, I think we've known that for a long time, and maybe Philadelphia got a little spoiled by the success he had, but he's always been a really good coach, and he's really the nurturing type. We've seen that with the players that have been under him, but also the coaches. I mean, everyone who ever works with this guy ends up loving him and calling him like a family figure, and I think that goes a long way when he's bringing up these coaches. He cares about their well-being, and he wants to see them succeed. He wants to see his assistants move on and get better jobs, get head coaching jobs. I think he gets satisfaction out of that. So I think that those are some of the reasons why you look at his coaching tree and it keeps growing.
Well, we know he's not batting 1,000, but he's done a pretty darn good job. When it comes in terms of the Eagles, now Doug Pederson's the guy in Philadelphia, has 1 year under his belt. As we enter year number 2 of the Doug Pederson era, where's your confidence in the coach after seeing what he was able to do last year?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that's twofold, because obviously being a head coach is a lot more than just what happens on the field. So when you talk about the off-the-field stuff, I thought he handled that for the most part really well. I mean, he got a lot of stuff thrown at him last year from the Josh Huff situation and Nigel Bradham. So he had a lot to deal with last year, and he handled it pretty well. But on the football side of things, I think there's a little bit left out there. I think that he would admit that too. I think he made some mistakes, but ultimately I think he did an all right job.
When it comes in terms of improving, because last year, and I agree with some of your analysis, and then you really look at the coaching calls on the field, he did struggle. The Giants game comes to mind, the Cowboys game, some of the instances that do come to mind, even the challenge against the Packers. How does he learn? How does he improve? I know that he doesn't have a whole lot of experience like a typical NFL head coach would have, but how does he improve for year number 2 and some of the things that we thought were questionable last year?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it comes with experience, and maybe at some point he will turn over play calling duties. I know that's when you're calling plays, it takes away from the other jobs you have to do. But right now he will call plays next season. He's already told us that. So he's still going to have a full plate, and I think a lot of it really is just experience, though. I don't think those are things you can teach. You can't, you can try to mentally prepare yourself for being in that situation, but until you're in that spot, it doesn't really help.
And I'll ask you the same thing about Howie Roseman, because Howie's had a lot of experience and he's been in this role, then he's been kicked out of this role, then gets put back into this role. And now you're under the second year again of Howie being back in power. And I know we had the little press conference today, just the two of us press conference with Joe Douglas, but your confidence level in Howie Roseman, as this is going to be a big draft coming up when we get to April, at the end of April.
Yeah, it's going to be a big draft. I mean, the thing with Howie is he has to kind of yield some of that responsibility to Joe Douglas, and I think that if that's what happens, then I think the Eagles will be in a decent spot. That's been Joe Douglas's forte, really, is the draft. The new part of this job for him is the pro side of it. I mean, he hasn't done that as much, but when it comes to the draft, he knows what he's doing, and it's really up to Howie to kind of turn over that power to him and let him do what he does best. And today, Howie talked about, in January, he mentioned Band-Aids and how he didn't want to sign Band-Aids, and then he goes out and signs Chris Long. But it's a relatively short deal, a 2-year deal, and they just actually reached an agreement with Patrick Robinson, a cornerback. So they fill two needs there with veteran players, but it doesn't change the outlook long-term because they still have to build this thing through the draft. And ultimately, that comes down to Howie and Joe Douglas.
Dave, we talk about delegation with the coach, and we also talk about delegation with Howie Roseman. And yes, right now it seems like everything's all lovey-dovey between Howie Roseman and Joe Douglas. But when they get inside that draft room, I think you're right. To see if Howie's really going to let Joe do his magic or if he's going to override a lot of those decisions. I know Howie said he has all the final say in that, but right now it seems like Howie and Joe, they really get along well. Is that for show, or do you actually believe that Howie's a little bit changed from the different perspective that he had under Chip Kelly, and he's going to let really Joe attack this thing and get going?
Yeah, well, for now I think everything's working well, but we haven't really seen some of those unique situations come up. We haven't seen what happens when the two of them are in the war room and they have a difference of opinion on a big spot. I mean, they just haven't been in that situation yet, so it's really hard to tell what exactly they're going to be like in that situation. But so far, so good. I don't think it's for show, and I think the organization is really making a concerted effort to get Joe Douglas's face out there and make it known that he has a big role in this organization right now.
Dave Zangaro with us right now from Comcast Sportsnet. You mentioned some of the free agent signings today, but let's look at the bigger ones from earlier in the free agency period. Alshon Jeffrey, Torrey Smith. You also bring in Chance for that offensive line, and we'll see what his role is. So far, how do you evaluate what the Birds have done in free agency?
Yeah, so I think they got better in one key area they needed to get better, and the Alshon Jeffrey signing is big for them because they just didn't have any weapons last year. When you're trying to develop a franchise quarterback, you kind of need some weapons, and I think we saw Carson develop some bad habits last year when he didn't have an offensive line, when he didn't have receivers that could get open. So it makes sense that they made an effort to go out and get him some weapons. And Alshon Jeffrey's a really good one. I mean, when he's healthy, he's a really top-notch receiver. The question has been his health. And he has a chance to answer that question. And if they get a guy on a one-year deal who has something to prove, and yeah, it's going to be expensive if they want to re-sign him and he has a good year, but that's a pretty good spot to be in because that means he had a good year and he did it for your team.
Yeah, I like the move in the offseason. I know you would have liked to have a long-term resolution more quickly, but the market didn't really play that great out for wide receivers, and I didn't want them to overpay for someone like a Kenny Stills. But they address wide receiver, but they still haven't solved it long-term. That still leaves number 14 in the draft a little bit of an ambiguous draft pick, and everyone can make those types of predictions. With the draft at number 14, the draft being in Philadelphia, where do you look for the Eagles to go? What are you getting a feel on when it comes to number 14 in this year's draft?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a good chance we see an edge rusher. If Derek Barnett, you kind of see is there, I think he'd make a lot of sense, and the Chris Long signing doesn't change anything about that. Then you talk about the wide receivers, one of the top three is definitely going to be there at 14. It's just a matter of what they like. John Ross seems to make a lot of sense for them just because he's the the missing speed component that they've wanted for a long time. And then I know a lot of people are down on the cornerbacks at the area of 14. I'm not. I mean, if Marlon Humphrey from Alabama's there, I think he'd be a good pick. I'm a lot higher on Tre'Davious White from LSU than I think most people are. But I don't think, I've heard people tell me that he'd be a stretch at 14, and I don't think so. I think that you can't get too cute and worry about, well, this guy is projected to go 21st or 22nd. We have the 14th pick. We can't take him. I don't think you can think like that. I think if you have a guy ranked and rated that highly, you have to go take him, not really worry about what other people think there.
In terms of running back, they do need a running back. We know that. McCaffrey or Cook, do you like those two names at 14, or is that a little bit too early for you?
I mean, for me, and I kind of subscribe to the old school train of thought here, I wouldn't at that spot. I just think there's too much value at other positions when you're talking that high. And the Eagles have had success drafting running backs later. And Joe Douglas just last year got Jordan Howard while he was with the Bears in the 5th round. So my feeling on this is unless you think a running back is really special, I wouldn't take him in the 1st round. And I don't think any of these 3 guys, maybe Fournette, but the other 2, I just don't think that they're special enough to warrant that pick.
When you have so many needs, you just got to hit on this pick. That's what it comes down to. They need to not only hit on the 1st-round pick, but then the rest of the picks in the draft as well, because I think we're talking about, they could go wide receiver at number 14, they go corner, they could go pass rusher. There's just so many needs. And when you get to running back, and you're right, some teams, you get Ezekiel Elliott like the Cowboys, and it works, but then you see a lot of teams also a little apprehensive to go running back in the 1st round. A name that's going to be around, and it's because of the off-the-field stuff, is Joe Mixon. And we know the Eagles do have some interest in Mixon, and obviously you don't condone anything that he did off the field. It was despicable. But how much of interest do you think the Eagles will have in Mixon, and when do you think the earliest that he may be going off the draft board if they do elect to go that route?
Yeah, I think they are interested in him. From a football standpoint, he would fit extremely well with what they do offensively. You have to ask yourself, is it worth it? And they're going to go through that. They're already going through that. They've gone through it. And they're going to do their best to determine if it is worth it. And if they're going to take him, it's going to be in the 2nd round. I don't think this guy's lasting longer than that. He's just too talented. And I'm sure there are some teams who have kind of completely sworn him off. I doubt the Eagles are one of them. That doesn't seem to be their style. They really like to kind of dive into these players, do their own independent research, and come away with their own feelings, their own thoughts on it. And I think that's what they're going to do here. And I think they're interested. They have to kind of weigh the positives and negatives. Is it worth the backlash? Because if they draft this kid, there's going to be a lot of backlash. We all saw the video. But if he does end up in Philadelphia, just from a purely football standpoint, he'd make it quite a difference right away.
Wrap it up with Dave Zangaro, who's at the NFL League meetings right now. This is the Zach Gelb Show, Fox Sports 920, The Jersey. Jeffrey Lurie's going to speak later this evening. I don't really expect much. Maybe there'll be some stuff on those Kelly Green uniforms and a little bit on Howie's timetable, and I'm sure he won't even go to details about that. But what are the big questions that you're going to be lining up asking Jeffrey Lurie later on this evening?
Yeah, I think first things first, we have to ask him about this perceived extended role in football matters, because we've heard for a while now that he's been more involved. And it certainly seems like, and it will be understandable if he is, but this is our first chance to ask him about the degree to which he has been involved. And it's been a long year without talking to the owner of the football team. We haven't talked to him since they drafted Carson Wentz. It's been a really long time. So you have questions about Carson. You have questions about Doug. You have more questions about the job Howie's done kind of reshifting the roster again. Whenever the owner talks, it's always worth listening to, and I know that people will say he doesn't say much anyway, but sometimes he does. And I think that was the case last year at the owners' meetings down in Boca. He talked about really the reasoning behind giving Chip Kelly power and then taking it away, and it was insightful. So I'm hoping we get some more of that today.
Dave Zangaro with us from Comcast Sportsnet. In terms of Howie Roseman's timetable, in your opinion, how long of a leash does Howie Roseman have with Jeffrey Lurie for the upcoming future?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and I don't really have a good answer for you on that because, at one point Jeffrey was thought to be kind of the model of patience in the NFL. He waited seemingly forever with Andy to try to get a championship, and it didn't work. And then with Chip, it was pretty short comparatively. So I'm not exactly sure, but I think the leash is definitely shorter now than it would have been 10 years ago because time's ticking. He's 65 years old now, and they've only gotten to the big game once. So I would think that everything is more pressing now, and that leash gets shorter by the day.
Now, I have two reaction questions for you before you go. Let's first start off with Vegas. The Raiders to Vegas, your reaction on that?
Not surprising after the amount of money the city ponied up. I think it leads to questions about, obviously, being in that type of city should maybe concern coaches or the coach of that team and the coaches of teams that are going there. But you can find ways to get in trouble in any city. The bigger question for me is, can that city support an NFL team? Can they fill up seats 8 times a year? It's a pretty transient market. I'm not sure if they will be able to after the first few years where it's just the new fun thing to do.
And then in terms of the rule changes, that's the other big story at the league meeting. You have the replay that's going to change, and now Dean Blandino and his crew is going to be in charge of that, and then also no leaping for a field goal blocking. You can't leap over the center like some teams have done in the last few years. What really stands out to you about some of these rule changes that are now official today?
Yeah, well, Philadelphia proposed the no leaping rule. That was pretty much a slam dunk from what I understand. The NFLPA really wanted it, and the league kind of obliged there. Those are fun plays, but they do a lot of things here at these meetings in the name of safety, and that was one of them today. Aside from that, I didn't see anything super noteworthy about the new rules. The Eagles, of course, they originally proposed 4 playing rule changes. They ended up presenting just one of them, and it was the only team proposed rule that went through today.
But your Twitter mentions have to be a little bit crazy today when Dean Blandino, who was on a Cowboys party bus, is now in charge of replays, right? The Eagle fan can't like that.
Yeah, I haven't seen too much of it, but you're right. I mean, it's not something that people really enjoy. But that's the law of the land, and they have to stick with it. So not really much you can do there.
You know what's going to happen. It's going to be a Cowboys-Eagle game this year at the Link, maybe a playoff spot on the line if you want to get a little bit crazy. I don't think the Eagles are going to the playoffs. And there's going to be a replay that goes in favor of the Cowboys, and every Eagle fan is going to have this conspiracy theory that the league's out to get the Eagles. I could definitely see that happening, Dave.
Yeah, I'd put money on that. You can do that in Vegas when you're there in 2021.
But the league won't support it. Dave Zangaro from Comcast Sportsnet. We appreciate it. Thanks so much.
No problem.